Welcome to TradeTheNBA.com. This is John's reports for the 4th of February. Well, we talked about the S&P as it moved above the 50% there, got to the 61, couldn't quite get over the hump there, but the concern was the rising NBI weight, and as I mentioned, the pivot down would pull us back to the 50%, and at that particular point, we'd be able to gauge whether or not weight overtakes, which would result in a move closer to zero. Now, this pivot down, interesting, but catastrophic, no, because magenta is well above the yellow here, so it may express some weakness, but not exactly what you would classify as terrible. And Spider didn't complete here, where I mentioned before that cyan would rise above and take out the green, and did not quite do that. So still leaves it in place. Really, what we had talked about here was those two yellow dots here. Lines actually from the histogram almost being positive extremes, and there was a good likelihood that those would fill, and that's exactly what happened from an ES standpoint. From a NASDAQ standpoint, it had a little bit lower to go, but it moved down to the 23%. Of course, Amazon pushing that up in the post-market right now significantly off the lows from where it was, so that was a big sigh of relief for a lot of people, but there's some serious damage was done within the NBI readings there, as well as likewise a little bit closer to the spider setup between the cyan and green at this particular stage, but still rising red DOC. So all those things just give you volatility, but end up being more neutral positive than that, so nothing to get overly excited about. Gold still maintaining its push, and it's hard to imagine gold still languishing where it is, given the fact of what we've seen with oil and the inflation print. Of course, the ECB came out and said, yeah, we're really concerned about inflation. Interestingly enough, most of that inflation is taking place in the northern part of Europe. Didn't really translate much to Italy except for energy prices, and that's not going to get any better anytime soon. So the likelihood of the ECB raising rates makes the euro much more attractive than America at this particular stage. And from a TLT standpoint, we got pretty close to breaking into those new lows. Came back a little bit there towards the end of session. But again, USO right here, still projecting that there's rampant inflation is still going to be a thing. It never was transitory, despite the talk. Interestingly enough, with Amazon, gives a rise in Bitcoin coming back up to its 23%, and nice pop off with the NBI white leading that reached its 0%. So the magenta moving above. It's a decent setup. Not to mention you have orange dipping below 7.5, which is like as a potential cover point to the flip. ETH, very attractive the way it handles ETH beautifully with the pink bars and that. So the algo pretty darn clean within that setup, and everything's just being bought from that Amazon read, which, well, it's a big percentage, doesn't really account for much of what else happens in the real economy. So it's an interesting driver. 50K from the ES has red leading, so we'll see how sustainable this point move turns out to be. Magenta's going to have to take back over that, but we can see for 50K green above cyan, so short's just basically exiting the building. Good way to describe it. From intraday action, here's the ending of the 5K, so we waited for the print to turn around, and I pointed that we were seeing a little bit of the magenta staying above yellow. It finally dipped back below, but then as soon as white crossed back underneath it, magenta was back over, and that took place right before the turn to green, right there, and boom, and then Amazon and tick off. And it was a significant one, because getting back above that 45.05 range, or 45.10 actually is what it was for 50%, puts price back above 50%, which is going to be very encouraging for institutions to want to jump in on. and that's something that we mentioned in the report the other day. But if we go back, during the day, there was a lot of noise, but it was mostly just weak. Started off soft, continued in that European session by the time it opened here. They tried to capture a bid back and forth, but by this point things just got ugly, and we continued to start then playing for which of the algo levels we were going to hit stop out and start to get some serious buys, and that really didn't happen here until the end of the day. They really drove down towards that 44.59 algo, and at that point they figured they had enough supply from all of the dip sell and caused a little bit of pop, and they held that until the Amazon results, and bingo. Actually, I think I have the Amazon chart up here. So this is what the Amazon day looked like prior, and shot up 200 and some, and then dropped back down 100. It was like as low as 87, but now back up to 237. So it dipped down, and it's all the way back up to full peak. So it's going to be right up near its 50% level at that particular point. And I was pointing this out that it was weak, except for the fact that when you don't get that on a daily, particularly that MBI magenta below yellow, you often get the turnaround bounces, and it can be pretty significant. And plus, I just wasn't buying that Amazon was going to produce poor numbers. Their cloud computing has been doing excellent. I'm sure that's going to be reflected. And with the number of continued lockdowns and restrictions, plus winter weather, you would think that they would have done excellent during this whole situation. So I haven't seen what the numbers were yet, but I will take a look at them. Just interesting to report that. Put the 5K back up there so we can see how this is moving along. Interesting that it's all in positive extremes from this peak right here, so keep that one in mind, 44.75. So just below that 85 level, and still even this next segment starting just before 4,500. Also producing a series of positive extremes right now. So that's the long and short of it. As always, though, I will update you on the Skype chat. Anything relevant, trade well. We'll talk to them later.